there is something you are currently stuck on, a problem that won't resolve, a situation that feels immovable, a door that keeps being closed when you need it open, something that is standing between you and where you are trying to go, and that you have been treating, quite reasonably, as an obstacle, as something to get around, get through, or wait out. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, Stoic philosopher, the man who ruled the most powerful empire in the Western world while writing privately every night about how to be a better person, had a different way of seeing that obstacle. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." 10 words. One of the most practically useful ideas in the history of philosophy. Tonight we go deep into what it actually means, and what changes when you start applying it. Stoicism is one of the most misunderstood philosophies in the popular imagination. The word stoic in everyday use has come to mean something like emotionally flat, the person who doesn't react, who absorbs difficulty without visible response, who keeps their face still when everything around them is falling apart. That is not what the Stoics meant. Not even close. The Stoics, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, were not teaching emotional suppression. They were teaching something far more sophisticated, the distinction between what is within your control and what is not, and the liberation that becomes available when you genuinely understand the difference. What is within your control? In the Stoic framework, almost nothing external. Not other people's behavior. Not the weather. Not the economy. Not whether your work is recognized. Not whether the people you love stay healthy. Not the 1,000 variables that make up the circumstances of a life. What is within your control? Your response. Your judgment. The meaning you assign to what happens. The action you choose to take. Your own character. The values you act from. The person you are deciding to be in each moment. That is the whole of the Stoic philosophy in its foundation. Everything else builds from that distinction. Marcus Aurelius came to Stoicism as a young man through his tutor, Junius Rusticus, who introduced him to the teachings of Epictetus. He spent his entire adult life, including nearly 2 decades as emperor, trying to apply Stoic principles to circumstances that tested them relentlessly. Plague, war, political betrayal, the deaths of children, the endless weight of governing an empire that was already beginning its long decline. The Meditations, his private journal, is the record of that attempt. Not a polished philosophical treatise, a working document. The notes of a man actively trying, every day, to think clearly about what was happening to him and respond to it well. What makes the Meditations remarkable is not the originality of the philosophy. Other Stoics stated the ideas more systematically. It is the evidence that a man in one of history's most difficult positions kept returning to these ideas as genuinely useful tools rather than abstract principles. He wasn't writing for an audience. He was writing to remember, to keep himself oriented when the circumstances of his life made good thinking difficult. The line about the obstacle, the impediment to action, advances action, what stands in the way becomes the way, appears in Book 5 of the Meditations. In context, it is part of a longer reflection on how the mind of a person committed to virtue and reason responds to resistance. Marcus was not making a motivational point. He was making an observation about the structure of how a well-oriented person actually moves through difficulty, not despite obstacles, through them, with them, by means of them. The obstacle, properly understood, is not separate from the path. It is the next part of the path. The question is only whether you can see it that way. The idea requires unpacking because it is easy to misread as forced positivity, as the instruction to pretend that bad things are actually good things, to smile at your problems and call them opportunities, and move on. That is not what Marcus meant. He was not naive about difficulty. He buried children. He governed through plague. He spent years on military campaigns in conditions of genuine hardship. He was not a man who had never encountered real resistance and was offering abstract comfort from a position of ease. What he was saying is more precise and more demanding than positive reframing. He was saying that the obstacle reveals something about the situation, about yourself, about what is actually required, that the clear path never would have, and that the person who can read that revelation clearly and act on what it shows them is not just surviving the obstacle. They are being shaped by it into something more capable than they were before they encountered it. Think about the obstacles that have most significantly shaped who you are, not the minor inconveniences, the genuinely difficult things, the failures that forced you to reconsider your approach, the rejections that redirected your path, the losses that restructured your priorities, the situations that refused to resolve the way you needed them to, and in refusing, forced you to develop capacities you didn't previously have. In almost every case, looking back, the obstacle produced something. Not despite being an obstacle, because it was one. Because it could not be bypassed or ignored or waited out. Because the only way through it required you to grow in some specific direction that the comfortable path would never have demanded. The Stoic observation is that this is not accidental. It is the structure of how difficulty works when it is met with the right orientation. The obstacle is always teaching something, always revealing something, always creating pressure in a specific direction that, if you move with it rather than against it, produces development that nothing else could have produced. Marcus identified 3 distinct levels at which the obstacle can be transformed. The first is perception, how you see the obstacle, the Stoic practice of not adding unnecessary suffering to what is already difficult, of distinguishing between the obstacle itself and the story you are telling about the obstacle. The obstacle is the thing, the catastrophizing, the resentment, the extended narrative about why this is happening to you specifically, and what it means about your worth or your fate. That is the story. And the story almost always makes the obstacle larger than it actually is. The second is action, what you do in response to the obstacle. The Stoic emphasis here is on persistence without rigidity, continuing to move forward while remaining willing to change your approach when the current one is not working. The obstacle does not mean stop. It means find another way, or find the same way approached differently, or find that what you thought you were trying to reach was not actually what you needed, and the obstacle has revealed that. The third is will, the deepest level, the capacity to accept what cannot be changed without being diminished by it. Not passive resignation. The active choice to incorporate even the worst outcomes into your understanding of your life without allowing them to destroy your capacity to continue living it well. This is where the Stoics and Nietzsche converge, in the insistence that what happens to you is not the measure of who you are. How you respond to it is. The practical shift that the obstacle is the way produces is subtle but consequential. It changes your relationship to difficulty from adversarial to instrumental. The adversarial relationship to difficulty, which is the default for most people most of the time, treats obstacles as interruptions, as deviations from a plan that should have proceeded smoothly, as evidence that something is wrong with the situation, with other people, with luck, with you. The energy expenditure of the adversarial relationship is enormous. Fighting something, resenting something, trying to force something to be different than it is. These are exhausting orientations that consume resources without producing movement. The instrumental relationship treats the obstacle as material, as something to work with rather than against. Not because the obstacle is secretly good. It may genuinely be bad, genuinely painful, genuinely costly. But because the question of whether it is good or bad is less useful than the question of what it makes possible that was not possible before. A business that fails teaches something about the market, about the idea, about your own capacities and blind spots that the successful business never would have. A relationship that ends badly, however painful, clarifies something about what you need and what you are that the comfortable relationship obscures. An illness that slows you down forces a confrontation with how you have been living that the healthy body never demanded. None of this means the failure or the ending or the illness was good. It means it was real. And reality, met honestly rather than resisted constantly, always has something in it worth working with. Marcus Aurelius wrote his journal during plague and war and personal loss. He was not pretending those things were secretly fine. He was finding, every day, the specific response to specific circumstances that kept him moving forward in a way he could respect. That kept him, in his own terms, acting like the kind of person he was trying to be, regardless of what the circumstances were doing. The Stoic practice is not something you install once and have forever. It is a daily discipline, which is why Marcus kept returning to it in his journal, kept reminding himself of principles he had already understood, kept applying them to new situations that tested them in new ways. The obstacle you are currently facing, the one that came to mind when this video began, is not going to resolve itself by thinking about Stoicism. What might shift is your relationship to it, the question you bring to it. Whether you are asking, why is this happening to me, or what does this make possible? Whether you are treating it as an interruption to your life, or as the current material of it. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, still working, still governing, still writing in his journal about how to be better at the thing he found most difficult, being a good person in a position that made goodness almost impossibly complicated. He never resolved that difficulty. He kept meeting it. Every day, in every new form it arrived in, with the same basic orientation. What is within my control here? What is the right response? How do I move forward in a way I can respect? The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Not because obstacles are secretly blessings, because the person who learns to move through them rather than around them becomes someone that the person who never faced them couldn't have been. That is the whole of it. Simple enough to remember. Difficult enough to require a lifetime of practice.